Geoengineering allows militaries to command and control the battlefield, to throw communication signals much further and more efficiently in an ionized atmosphere. So power, profit, and then the most troubling one, and this is very hard for people to get their minds around, what we might call population control.
To control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
It dawned on me many years ago that the official story we've been presented with about what is called climate change, it seems to be incomplete at best. Few in the civil sector fully understand that geoengineering is primarily a military science and has nothing to do with either cooling the planet or lowering carbon emissions. When they say we're waging war on carbon dioxide, they're literally, as you just said, waging war on life itself. This transhumanist impulse to merge the human species with the machines and technologies that we've created. Breathing consciously and strategically is the portal into more mindfulness. I think really awakening to our potential as humans. For those humans who don't believe, as you said earlier, in geoengineering, please understand that there are literally tens of thousands of pages of public records all over the world indicating ongoing weather manipulation and climate modification projects for almost 100 years.
Welcome to The Wellness Way with me, Philly J. Lay, a layperson's guide to your natural health systems, your very own NHS. Hello, lovely people, and welcome to another episode of The Wellness Way. Now, a few weeks back, I had the absolutely beautiful Emma Australia on the podcast. And as you know, I am a massive fan of breathwork. I'm a Soma breathwork coach and also of the Wim Hof method. I know the benefits of it, but I struggle with it. And then recently, I was at a conference and I heard this man talk that I'm going to introduce you to today. And I was just in awe. Not just because of his breathwork information and techniques, but he brought up something else at the conference that is a passion close to my heart. And breathwork is singularly the most important thing you can do for your health. And so I want to introduce you to the absolutely wonderful doctor, but not in a white coat doctor, Dr. Rob Williams. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Philly, it is so good to be here with you in the Woodpeckers podcast studio. It's amazing.
It's beautiful. It's Narnia, isn't it?
It is Narnia. Yes. Thank you for the tour this morning as well.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for whizzing out of London on your travel day.
I will confess it was nice to whiz out of London. And the sun is out here for the first time since I've been in the UK. So that's a sign.
Well, it is a sign, and we're going to talk about that later. But first of all, I want you to tell the audience a little bit about your journey and what brought you to where you are today. You are a Wim Hof instructor. You've trained with Patrick McEwen. You know, you're one of the best breath guys in the world. So tell us what brought you on that journey.
Yeah, so when I turned 50 years old, I realized that I wanted to learn more about how the human mind and body and spirit can be optimized, as one does, I suppose, when one gets to be...
Midlife crisis. You can go and get a Porsche, or you can go...
Yes, I'm going to learn about breathing. Yeah, exactly. So I live in Vermont in the United States, and I was out standing in the snow one morning in my bare feet, having taken the chicken compost out to the chickens, and I noticed that my feet, after that initial cold shock, felt really good. And then I tapped into my breathing. And in that moment, Philly, I recognized there was something very powerful going on. And I wanted to understand that more deeply. So I enrolled with the Wim Hofers, became now a level 2 Wim Hof method instructor. Shout out to Emma. And that really was the doorway into breathing. I like to call it breath play.
You did that in the conference. I love that because we all call it breath work.
Breath work. And the Wim Hof method is work when you breathe that way, cyclic hyperventilation. But most of the time, if we're breathing optimally, it should feel like play. In fact, we shouldn't really even feel the breath at all once we train ourselves to drop in to that flow. So that, in a nutshell, is how I came to discover the power of conscious, strategic breathing. And that was about 5 years ago.
And breath work, I believe, is the stairwell to consciousness.
Absolutely. You mentioned Patrick McCohen. Shout out to Patrick,
Yep.
up north in Ireland.
One of my first podcasts, right back at the beginning.
Yeah, he's quite something. And he has that beautiful Irish accent. And he said to me once, he said, Rob, if you want to teach them to meditate, Rob, you must teach them how to breathe first. There is no meditation, Robbie, without breathing. And he's absolutely right. Breathing consciously and strategically is the portal into more mindfulness, a word we hear quite a bit out there in the culture these days. Conscious strategic breathing is the portal into, I think, really awakening to our potential as humans, body, mind, and spirits. And my favorite sort of little takeaway linguistically, I know you're a word person, and I'm guessing your podcast audience is as well. The word from Latin, spira or spiritus, translated to English, spiritus means breath. And so when you look at words in English that have that at their root, you find some of our most powerful English words. Respire. Respiration simply means to breathe over and over again. As James Nestor says so beautifully in his book Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, respiration is reciprocation. We are breathing as humans in flow, 20,000 breaths per day with the rest of living, breathing creation, which is something that indigenous Eastern, Western spiritual traditions have long understood. When you look at the word aspire, there's that word again. When we aspire, or our aspirations mean to breathe our way upward to a higher goal or a vision.
In spirit.
Yes, in spirit. Spiritual, a word that's bandied about a lot. But when you say someone is spiritual, what that could mean is that this someone who is spiritual is deeply aware of the presence and power of conscious, strategic breathing. Inspiring one another, as you do on your podcast, when we inspire, what that means is we breathe good energy into one another. So think of someone out there who you have inspired or has inspired you. What's going on? It's a bit mysterious, right? But there is this exchange of energy via the power of the breath. And my favorite Spiro word is the word conspire. Conspire. A conspiracy, which is a word that gets a bad rap these days, right? But a conspiracy simply means a group of humans breathing together for strategic purpose. A conspiracy, yeah. And as Catherine Austin Fitts likes to say, if you're not in a conspiracy, get in one right away, because that's where all the fun is to be had, right? So breathing is like when you begin to sort of track the linguistic path of the word and the concept and the power of the breath, you find it manifesting itself in every one of our human, religious, and spiritual traditions. And what's so odd, I would say, Philly, is that we have forgotten all of this in this postmodern 21st century world that we live in, the hurly-burly, right, of modern life, postmodern life. And to simply slow down, yes, but simply to become more aware in the moment of the power of our breath is so profound.
It is. You did a wonderful exercise at the conference that I met you at that I'm going to ask you to do at the end, where you breathe into the different parts of the body, because it was so profound and you could feel the energy in the room as we exchanged our thoughts and, you know, just this incredible peace that we had. Now, I can't lie, I was triggered to fuck by a lot of the talks at the weekend, because you talk about breath work, we know how important it is, and yet your talk wasn't on breathwork. You did a beautiful exercise at the beginning and at the end, but your talk was on something completely different, which was geoengineering. A lot of people I know still don't believe that there is geoengineering going on in our skies. And you have a great website, Our Geoengineering Age.
.org.
.org.
Yes.
And we'll put that in the show notes.
Thank you.
What on earth, how did you start that journey? What on earth went through your mind that you went, I've got to do a web page on geoengineering?
So I'm trained as an environmental historian, and I've been teaching at the university level for decades about matters environmental. And it dawned on me many years ago that the official story we've been presented with about what is called climate change, and I'm using air quotes here for your listeners, it seems to be incomplete at best. And I have an old friend and colleague in Vermont, where we live, who came to me one day and he said, Rob, I've been noticing, as an environmentalist, a bird watcher, someone who cares very deeply about nature and about human nature, I've been noticing these strange trails in the sky. And I'm beginning to think there's something going on up there. And like most people, I would say, to your point of a moment ago, I'm busy. I'm raising kids. I'm teaching at the university. I'm running a farm. I have a wife. I don't want to be bothered. But he kept at it. He was very persistent with me. He said, look, I need your help. And so finally I said, okay, Ian Baldwin, who is the co-founder of Our Geoengineering Age, brilliant soul. So Ian sent me a paper he had written beginning to collect some scientific data around geoengineering. And that launched in 2018, OGA, Our Geoengineering Age.org. And Ian pulled into our work a nuclear geochemist by the name of Dr. J. Marvin Herndon, who had spent 40 years in an independent lab he ran in San Diego, California, studying the skies and the trees and the soils in Southern California and watching this madness descend over the West Coast. And then Ian brought in from Florida a brilliant public health leader down there, a guy named Mark Whiteside. And the three of them, Marvin, Mark, and Ian, began to publish papers on the science and the history of geoengineering. And then Ian brought me in to help build the website, collect all of these peer-reviewed scientific papers and historical essays. And voila, OGA was born at the website by 2018, 2019. And we've been publishing ever since. And I brought in a young gentleman, Paul Bean, who is our communications director now and runs all of OGA's social media, Substack, and all of our platforms. So we are a team of 5. It has been a labor of love, as many of these projects are, as you know.
Yep.
and what we're trying to do, in a nutshell, at OGA is to provide a global public audience with what we call an evidence-based exploration of Earth's most pressing yet underreported environmental issue, which is geoengineering, if we want to broaden that definition, weather manipulation and climate modification, which is really what geoengineering is in part.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Vandana Shiva was on the show and said that it was, it's a weapon of mass destruction. That's what it is.
Yes.
It's got a very long history behind it.
It does.
I wasn't, aware of these things. I was very late to the party, but it has a very long history. So take us back.
Yes.
Nearly 100 years, isn't it?
Well, let's go back thousands of years for a moment to Imperial China back in the day. The ancient Chinese emperors, among other leaders of the time, were looking up at the skies and thinking, wouldn't it be fantastic if we here at the Imperial Palace could figure out a way to control the weather? And the phrase that the ancient Chinese used for this, such an interesting phrase. They called it smart human shadow work.
Wow.
Yes. And they identified in ancient China what they called atmospheric rivers. In the same way that rivers run across the land, the Yangtze, the Huanghe, right, the rivers that made ancient Chinese civilization possible, these same emperors governing ancient China looked up at the skies and said, we can see that there are atmospheric rivers here that are moving moisture around, right, in what we now call weather, short term, and climate, kind of medium to long term. What if we could control those? So there has been an interest from Team Human in steering the weather and the climate for millennia. Fast forward to the invention of the airplane 100 plus years ago. That's when, of course, humans extended their reach up into the atmosphere in a consistent way. And by the 1940s, we had in the United States and other countries experiments with cloud seeding, putting silver iodide and other chemicals in local atmospheres above farms and regions of farming to try and create more surface area in the lower atmosphere to collect moisture, condensation, and rain. So that was really the beginning of modern geoengineering, was in the really kind of in the 1940s into the 1950s. And for those humans who don't believe, as you said earlier, in geoengineering, please understand that there are literally tens of thousands of pages of public records all over the world indicating ongoing weather manipulation and climate modification projects for almost 100 years.
Yeah.
And this was openly discussed and debated as a matter of public policy in the United States, where I'm from, until the late 1970s. Two things happened. The first, there were a number of journalists who blew the whistle on a very famous, now famous, geoengineering operation during the Vietnam War, when the U.S. was occupying Vietnam, called Operation Popeye.
Yeah.
And Operation Popeye was a U.S. military, a U.S. Air Force operation to try and geoengineer the skies over Vietnam, flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and try and destroy the Northern Vietnamese Army's supply lines to try and win the war against the Northern Vietnamese Army. And Seymour Hersh, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, wrote a couple of articles about this, came to global attention that geoengineering as a weapon of war was being used in Vietnam. And the second thing that happened at the United Nations, our friends at the UN, they drafted and convinced nations to sign on to what was called the Environmental Modification Treaty of 1978, ENMOD for short. And ENMOD, in its public statement, forbade the use of geoengineering for military purposes. We cannot geoengineer the weather, modify the climate as a weapon of war. However, and comes out of our research at OGA, we discovered, talking with lawyers, there's a massive loophole in the ENMOD treaty. Geoengineering for peaceful purposes is just fine.
Okay.
So let's say, Philly, that we're facing a climate change apocalypse. The Earth is rapidly warming. We can use geoengineering to, block the sun. We can, in the name of
saving the planet.
We can use geoengineering to, brighten the clouds in the name of saving the planet. Yes. We can use geoengineering to deploy iron into the oceans to try and absorb some of these pollutants in the name of
saving the planet.
Do you see where we're going with this?
Yeah.
So this is sort of, in a nutshell, the history of geoengineering. And to add one final chapter, which came up this past weekend at our conference, we're now seeing, and it's quite troubling actually, we're now seeing the combination of geoengineering with new technologies in synthetic biology. So the chemical nanoparticulates that have been deployed in the atmosphere for decades now are now being, I'll use the word laced, with some even stranger substances that were just beginning to get our arms around, those of us who are studying and researching and paying attention to all this.
I think for anybody that's new to this topic,
Yes.
it's a very big ask.
It is.
To tell people that this is going on, because it's hard to believe that people could be this evil.
It feels, and what's so strange about it, Philly, is, and I'm learning this from our podcast at OGA, talking with activists and researchers who have actually confronted pilots, for example, who are flying some of these planes. Talking with researchers, I think they're genuinely convinced, the geoengineers.
Yeah.
Many of them are genuinely convinced, because of the official narrative and the dominance of, apocalyptic climate change story, if you will, that Team Human really has to lean into geoengineering as a bit of a last resort. You may know the work of Bill McKibben, fellow Vermonter, and really sort of the poster child for the environmental movement in the United States. It was Bill McKibben who gave us the phrase global warming for the first time in his book, The End of Nature, back in 1988. And he and Al Gore and sort of that crew, if you will.
Oh, Al Gore with the private jet.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's his wife, isn't
correct.
it? Not
and,
him.
and the 12 homes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one.
So the strangest thing about this for me, Philly, as an environmental historian by training, is watching the environmental movement completely ignore 100 years of history when it comes to geoengineering, weather manipulation, climate modification. But I thought maybe this would be a good time to read a letter.
Yes. This is a letter that you read at the conference.
Yeah.
And I don't believe this letter to a very famous British paper, The Guardian, would ever get published now.
I don't think so. This was written in February of 2012 by a gentleman named Matt Anderson, who worked with Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a huge defense, I'm using air quotes, defense contractor. And he wrote this in The Guardian in 2012, and the letter says this: few in the civil sector fully understand that geoengineering is primarily a military science and has nothing to do with either cooling the planet or lowering carbon emissions. While seemingly fantastical, weather has been weaponized. At least 4 countries, the United States, Russia, China, and Israel, possess the technology and organization to regularly alter weather and geologic events for various military and black operations, which are tied to secondary objectives, including demographic, energy, and agricultural resource management. Here's the last part of the letter. Matt Anderson, 2012, The Guardian. Indeed, he writes, warfare now includes the technological ability to induce, enhance, or direct cyclonic events, earthquakes, drought, and flooding, including the use of polymerized aerosol viral agents and radioactive particulates carried through global weather systems. Various themes in public debate, including global warming, have unfortunately been subsumed into much larger military and commercial objectives that have nothing to do with broad public environmental concerns. These objectives include the gradual warming of polar regions to facilitate naval navigation and resource extraction. And the letter was titled At War Over Geoengineering.
Wow.
So that was 2012 in The Guardian. Wow. So that was 13 years ago. And
let me just ask you, because he was from a military company.
Yes.
Why would he spill the beans on this to The Guardian?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you always have to wonder, with any sort of public media outlet or source, what exactly is going on? Was that a little bit of hand being revealed? Was that a little, what some like to call the revelation of the method? Was he in retirement and got religion and felt like, I need to do my part here to kind of let people know what's really going on? So at OGA, Our Geoengineering Age.org, we have 2 series. We have our scientific papers, But we also have environmental and historical essays that we have drafted and published, pulling together some of this big picture geopolitical thinking. And there is a line of thought, and credit goes to Ian Baldwin for this. Could it be, Philly, that we're actually, in the name of saving the planet and cooling it, we are actually using geoengineering technologies to gradually warm the planet, melt the Arctic, to access all of the natural resources we know are buried under those mounds of polar ice?
Well, it's a very good question. We also, I've seen on Google Earth pyramids and what looks like lost cities in Antarctica. Now,
yes.
Pyramids have been very much in the news and trending on
yes,
TikTok
they have.
at the moment because
yes,
of the French scientific team that have gone
yes.
in and they've been using a heat technology, and they found these massive chambers going down for God, how many miles? I mean, it's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. That is the word. Yeah, it's amazing.
The pyramids that we see today in Egypt are, and we're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's this fascinates me. They're literally these tiny weeny little caps to something. And you talked earlier about the Chinese wanting to harvest the weather, control the weather.
Yes.
Were the Egyptians doing it? Were they bringing in energy, free energy? Tesla was completely fascinated with Egypt. And so you have to ask the questions, how long has this been going on for?
Yes.
And the fact that they want to free up Antarctica and melt the poles, and we know that there are, these extraordinary amount of resources down there.
Yeah. And Mr. Trump, the current occupant of the White House in the United States, has, some people say joked, some people say he's serious about annexing Greenland.
Yes.
Right, for example, or Canada.
Yes.
Yeah, and geopolitically, and I'm not endorsing this, but geopolitically, if you think like a world leader, Vladimir Putin in Russia, or Xi Jinping in China, or Donald Trump for the moment in the United States, or whomever, you've got to be asking yourself, okay, so how do we access all of those natural resources at a time when we possess these fantastical technologies that seem to allow us to manipulate the weather, to alter the climate? Why not? Why wouldn't we gradually melt the Arctic and open up that vast reserve to all of these natural resources, especially, as I'm sure your audience is familiar, as we're being herded as humans into this so-called fourth industrial revolution, this great reset, where we're going to electrify everything, right? We're going to throw oil and natural gas under the proverbial bus, right? These are now the villains all of a sudden, right?
And the thing is that we're made of carbon. We need carbon. Our trees need carbon. Yes. The insane British government has just spent or allocated 2 billion. Is it 2 billion or 22 billion? It's an obscene amount of money into building some kind of a plant that can harvest the carbon so that, we can survive this warming. All they needed to do was plant a fucking forest.
Yes.
It's insanity.
The assault on the human species mirrors the assault on all of living, breathing nature. And because you're a breath person, let's go down this road for just a moment. So we're waging war, they are waging war on carbon dioxide, which they call a waste gas. You probably have heard this, which is killing the planet.
Yep.
Carbon dioxide in the human body is our body's most important respiratory gas. It's not oxygen. It's carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide performs 3 powerful roles in the human body. Number one, we breathe in the presence of carbon dioxide. The urge to breathe in the human body is triggered by the rising levels of carbon dioxide. Number two, carbon dioxide actually lubricates the flow of oxygen into our bodies, down into our lungs, and into the hemoglobin in our 50 trillion red blood cells. And thirdly, at the cellular level, if we imagine all of the cells in our bodies for a moment, are breathing. And carbon dioxide actually catalyzes more efficient cellular respiration by allowing the cells to absorb energy from those oxygen molecules more efficiently. So when they say we're waging war on carbon dioxide, they're literally, as you just said, waging war on life itself.
Yeah.
And of course, our plant brethren depend upon carbon dioxide to prosper. So we find ourselves in this very strange moment, Philly, where the most important respiratory gas, indeed the building block of life itself, has been declared persona non grata by those who wish to move this project forward. It's very odd.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question because
Please.
this is what I just don't get. There's no part of me that understands this. They must know exactly what you said. They know this.
I think so.
Yeah, they're not stupid.
Yeah.
This is basic facts that we all know.
And from biology class.
Yeah, from biology. Yeah. Okay, so why would they have, and we'll come to what is in these trails later, but why would they put this into the sky knowing that it could kill them too? This is what I just don't understand.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's hard to know. So three thoughts. First of all, this is about power. Go back to the ancient Chinese emperors. We're doing this, geoengineering, because we can. Humans have a long history of hubris, right? Of flying too close to the sun, let's say, right? The Icarus story and all that.
Yeah.
So the second, I think, is there are tremendous amounts of money being made, both by advancing the official climate change narrative, that it's CO2 emissions killing the planet, right? And while we're advancing the official narrative, right, about greenhouse gas emissions, we're also under the radar. Remember, this has mostly been clandestine military projects, but more corporations, more civil actors are getting involved in geoengineering. There are billions of dollars being spent researching all of these technologies, deploying all of these technologies.
It's probably trillions. I mean,
it's big business.
It's massive business.
It's big business. And, you know, we had a president, I'm sure you know, Dwight Eisenhower, when he left the White House in January of 1961, he gave his famous speech about the military-industrial complex. But what everyone forgets about that speech, he also mentioned the scientific technocratic complex, right? That we are in the thrall of technocrats who, in the name of science, will do what they will do. And Eisenhower warned us famously to be on our guard as a civilization.
What year was that? Excuse me for not knowing American history well enough.
1961.
Okay.
And the very next year, in 1962, the man who would replace John F. Kennedy as president of the United States when Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Baines Johnson of Texas, liberal Democrat, by the way, gave a famous speech at a Texas university where he ended by talking about weather and climate modification and celebrated the coming of this new age. And his last line was, "He who controls the weather," Johnson famously said, "controls the world."
Yeah.
You've probably seen this clip.
Yeah, I have seen
It's been
that
making
clip.
the rounds. So that was 1962. That was the year after Eisenhower left and warned the American public and the world to be on our guard when it comes to the technocrats. So power, profit, and then the most troubling one, and this is very hard for people to get their minds around, but I think we're dealing with various forms of what we might call population control. And when I say population control, I don't necessarily mean culling, right? Like reducing the human population, although that might be a part of it.
They've been working quite hard on that.
Yeah. And
There was
again,
a lot of bedazzle handed out in 2020.
yes,
love.
and again, your audience is familiar with some of these. But as we learned at the conference in Kensington last weekend, there is afoot this transhumanist impulse to merge the human species with the machines and technologies that we've created. And they make no secret of this, right? They write books about it. They have websites about this.
Again,
they hold conferences about this.
I know people that are still very skeptical of this.
Yeah.
And it, again, is a big rabbit hole to go down.
It is. It is.
But, just brief us a little bit
Yeah.
on the main players here and some of the books that our audience can go and read.
Yeah, so the United Nations has now partnered with the World Economic Forum. Everyone's probably familiar with Klaus Schwab, who's sort of the current poster dude.
Who managed to write a whack of a book called The Great Reset in 2020 and get it out. Well, I wrote the Natural Wellness Journal, which is only 300 pages. And how, and that was mainly a journal. How the fuck you write a book, kind of 2 inches deep?
And he's followed up with a sequel. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the goal, in essence, of transhumanism is to merge humans, biological humans, with our digital technologies. And as fantastical as this may sound to some, this has been a project that has been ongoing for several decades now, kind of under the radar, again. But geoengineering, to bring it back to weather manipulation, climate modification, geoengineering technologies allow for the deployment of some of these transhumanist projects that will push the human species, and I would argue all forms of life, towards this merging between natural life, carbon-based, and what we might think of as synthetic, the synthetic.
So merging us with robots, really. AI is massively talked about at the moment. I saw something the other day that there are different stages of AI. So this stage that we're being shown at the moment, ChatGPT and all of that, which, we use as a team on this podcast. I'm not going to deny that when we're researching people. But what we do is we ask ChatGPT, who we've given a name, Charlie. So we don't know if Charlie's a girl or a boy.
Yes.
Not transgender, but just Charlie.
It's a good androgynous name,
we
Charlie.
Ask, and we'll say, could you read this book by? And so we are programming in the other side of the equation, because at the moment, Charlie was set up to program one narrative.
Yes.
So Charlie has done an awful lot of good reading, and you just know how to talk properly to get the information. But anyway, Charlie
I love that.
Gave us some information that there are actually 6 stages of AI at the moment, and we're just being shown the tip of the iceberg. And the stages go down, and there's one, level 3, which is the industrial complex, bioweapons, all of that, which Charlie doesn't have access to at the moment.
That's fascinating.
Which is quite fascinating.
Yes.
And they go on up to different levels, and it is so more advanced than I believe we know.
Yes, and that is typically the way this sort of predictive programming, let's say, works. The DARPAs of the world, DARPA being the Defense Advanced Research Project, kind of the Pentagon's brain, as one author described DARPA in the United States. They're often a few decades ahead of the rest of us in terms of these kinds of projects, and then they use the tools at hand to prime us, if you will, the global public for acceptance. And this is Hollywood, this is TV commercials, this is the television, the telly, right? If you go onto Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hulu, every other show is about this, transhumanism. It's fascinating. Yeah. Like, I just kind of keep an eye on it.
In the UK, I hate even saying the words, the BBC, I'm just going to have to tap on that one, Rob, excuse me.
Yes.
But, they did this series called Black Mirror.
Black Mirror is a perfect example.
Bloody hellfire.
Yeah.
And
that was years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, years ago. So they're using predictive programming to kind of soften up the species to accept the direction they want to herd us in. And, the AI is so fascinating because it is a tool. It's a very powerful tool. And I know many bright humans who are using it to good effect. And I do think, to your point, that we need to take some time to try and program, if you will, the AI, if you will, to be comfortable with competing versions of reality, competing versions of narrative. Because if we don't, we're going to get steamrollered.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why we use it, and which is why we get people like Dr. Vandana's, Shiva's books in there.
Yeah.
Go, can you read this and give us the 10 best questions to ask? Yeah, it's a fascinating way, but you have to talk to it properly.
Yes.
If you just say, what is geoengineering? It's going to say it's mythical.
Yes.
But if you know how to go, can you read this book? Can you read that book? Can you have a look at this webpage? And then give us, then it plays ball.
It does. I love that. Yeah. And since we're talking about resources, I should mention at ourgeoengineeringage.org, our website, we do have a resources page. I've read and reviewed, I think, probably the best books and films on geoengineering to date from a broad variety of perspectives. And for folks who are like, okay, I need to do a little due diligence here, I want to learn more, I would steer you to a couple of books. James Colby, professor emeritus at a little college called Colby College in Maine in the United States, wrote a book called Fixing the Sky, The Checkered History of Weather and Climate Modification. Very well-researched book. Interesting about the book, he goes right up to the current moment, but then doesn't go there. And maybe he was just hedging his bets, maybe he retired. But in any case, Fixing the Sky is quite good. But we also have a podcast, and I just had a conversation there with a woman in Washington State in the United States who I consider the matriarch of geoengineering research. Her name is Alana Freeland. Alana Freeland, she's written now 4 books about geoengineering and synthetic biology over the past 10 years. She's working on a 5th, specifically on synthetic biology, and she is a really remarkable human, very insightful. She has a very interesting spiritual dimension to her. And she comes out of the Rudolf Steiner universe, if you're familiar.
Yep. And that's all biodynamic farming and growing, and for anybody that doesn't
Steiner
know it.
Being one of our great 20th century mystics here in Europe. Yeah. Very, very accomplished human. So Alana Freeland's work is quite revealing. And for those who are interested in doing a little bit of deeper dive into this, I would recommend Colby and Freeland as 2 places to start. Okay.
There was a brilliant professor in Wales for many years, Dr. Christopher Exley, was doing an awful lot of research on this. And then what happened was your funding gets stopped, you get kicked out of the universities, and this is what happens to medical professionals as well. This is the set pattern. They then make you look like a complete lunatic fool.
Correct. Yes. And
so they set out just to completely trash everything you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. Exley is a legend, as I'm sure your audience knows, in the health choice and medical freedom world, for sure, for his work on aluminum and researching aluminum. Yeah, he's quite something. But you're absolutely right. It's very hard for humans who are enmeshed in your typical organization, academic, corporate, civil sector, to really gain any traction by having these sorts of conversations. I was teaching an environmental history course at a not-to-be-named university, big lecture course, 200 students.
I love that, not-to-be-named university.
Yeah.
I think every university should be called not-to-be-named university.
I've taught it many over the years, and it was very interesting because there is such an acceptance of the official narrative around climate change amongst the undergraduates that to try and provoke any critical conversation about that is to really open up the door to almost irrationality. It's quite something.
We've been programmed.
Yeah.
For a very long time. This has been going on a very long time. What was I can't think of the name of the chap that founded Greenpeace, but...
yes,
you know who I'm talking
I
about.
do.
What's
Yes.
his name?
It begins with a P. Patrick?
Yes,
Patrick.
I think it is.
Shoot. Yeah. But yeah, he's on record now.
He's on record
Yeah.
saying, and he was the founder of Greenpeace, saying, I never ever said there was climate change. There is not climate change.
Yeah.
It's a local farmer near here, Farmer Robin. He studied at Oxford. He looks after all the woods and everything around here and the forests, and he studies all the tree rings and everything. He said, believe me, we're just in a very, very normal cycle, warming cycle.
Yeah.
The planet is extremely clever, and it can warm and it can cool. We had a little ice age in the UK back in Tudor times. We have had hotter years, and man adapts incredibly well to this.
Yeah, you're reminding me of another famous English scientist, James Lovelock, who gave us the Gaia hypothesis, that the Earth is sentient and is alive and is able to self-regulate in an infinitely complex way that we will never understand.
No.
Yeah. So again, back to geoengineering, the notion that we can, and maybe we should talk about how geoengineering works for just a moment, the notion that we can, in a 3-phase process in the lower atmosphere, I call it, are you ready? I call it pump, jump, and dump. Number one, we can pump nanoparticulate metals into the lower atmosphere, right? So this is biochemistry, right? To Chris Exley and aluminum. We can emplace nanoparticulates of various metals, aluminum, barium, strontium, etc. And this is just one sort of type of operation, probably the most well-known amongst the researchers. So we pump these nanoparticulates into the atmosphere. We jump them with focused electromagnetic energy. And if people like that's impossible, take a look at the project known as HARP, which was a pilot project in Gakona, Alaska, begun in the 1970s, a series of phased array antennas which are designed to generate and then focus electromagnetic energy so that when you ionize the lower atmosphere, you turn it into a battery, essentially. You can direct electromagnetic energy at that ionized atmosphere and try and begin to move weather around. And again, this goes back to the mid-70s.
Yeah, I want to talk a lot more about HARP, actually.
So we pump the metals in. We jump the ionized atmosphere, the metallic atmosphere, with ionized energy, right, focused. And then, of course, after we're done having our way with whatever experiments we're conducting, dumping. All of these nanoparticulates have to go somewhere, and we know where they go, right? They fall down to the earth. They encase living organisms, trees, bushes, streams,
our soil,
rivers, our soil, the birds, the bats, the bees, right? All of whom are in many ways much more sensitive to nanoparticulates, being smaller creatures and perhaps a bit more fragile in their own way than we humans and other large mammals are. So when we look at so-called wildfires, let's say, in California, and we understand,
Maui and
lots
of wildfires
and we
going
understand,
on, and in the UK at the moment.
Yes, and we understand that the west coast of the United States has been ground zero, as J. Marvin Herndon has researched and we've published, for literally decades for these geoengineering projects. The forests in California, for example, the trees there are literally sort of been coated with these nanoparticulate metals, which desiccate the trees, dry them out, make the trees more flammable. So when a fire comes along, for one reason or another, you're going to see what we've been seeing with these so-called wildfires for many years now. And again, the environmentalists, unfortunately, and I speak as one, are the last to the table when it comes to really taking seriously the environmental consequences of these kinds of projects.
Oh gosh, it worries me so much that this is going on and that this isn't mainstream conversation at every dinner table around the world at the moment. It really does frighten me.
Agreed.
I want to come to HAARP.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So HAARP was something I only discovered after Maui and the fires in Maui. And I was seeing a lot of pictures of blue cars, blue roofs, a blue dustbin that weren't affected by the wildfires at all. And then somebody sent me some research on some facts on HAARP. I didn't know it existed. I'm seeing photographs that I'm being sent now of, other countries like China where they're all painting their roofs blue. What's going on here, Rob? Unpick this one for us.
Yes. So HAARP is an acronym. It stands for the High Altitude Active Auroral Research Project. And it was begun as a military project in Alaska in the 1970s with these phased array antennas I mentioned. And it's now been replicated, these phased array antenna systems all over the world, land, sea, what have you. And again, this is a military operation, as our friend from The Guardian letter reminds us, right, in 2012. So speculating here, because again, a lot of this is not openly discussed. But what some have pointed to is the United Nations, their particular agenda. Is it 2030? Is it 2025? They seem to sort of keep changing the number. But the idea is to essentially remake the planet in a particular, with a particular strategy that will, as we were mentioning before, power, profit, population control, right, will herd humans off certain areas of land onto others areas of land in the name of preserving, right, for nature.
Yep.
Some of these larger parcels. And the blue roofs that you mentioned, some speculate, are ways to indicate what areas should not be touched with these particular military projects. Directed energy weapons, some say, in combination with geoengineering, some say. And I'm speculating here a little bit because there are a lot of moving pieces. And when people say to me, do you really believe that that's happening? My response is, we've had the technologies for decades. So it is very much a possibility that it's happening. But we all have to go to sort of get up to speed on what's been going on with these technologies for decades.
I think you also have to look at where these wildfires happen.
Yes.
There is a grid of maps that have been mapped up for all over the world where there are going to be, again, in inverted commas, smart cities.
Yes.
Now, there's nothing smart about those cities. They are Black Mirror territory.
Yes.
It seems that these, again, just speculating, but it seems that a lot of these fires have happened on, Maui, very sacred land. It's called it's the heart of the earth. It's the beating heart of the earth. You've got all of these areas and these maps where they have designed where these smart cities will be. People will be living on a very small amount of land in tower blocks. There's one being built out in the Middle East at the moment, and it's quite. I've seen the artist's impression. It's all kind of mirrored so that you don't see it. It's this hidden city.
Yeah, I think it's in the UAE, if I'm not mistaken. United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
Yeah, and by the way, the UAE government, the Chinese government, the Russian government, they're all on record as saying, we geoengineer all the time. It's only in the United States where people are pretending that this isn't a possibility or not happening. It's very strange.
Well, and in the UK. But they don't admit it at all.
Yeah.
But Dubai, there were all those photographs of the really big hailstones about a year ago.
Yeah.
Bobby Qureshi, head of education for the College of Naturopathic Edison, he filmed these golf balls of hailstones coming down with his young child kind of going, I thought you said the weather was going to be nice here, Daddy.
Yes, yeah. Well, and if you're a wealthy young sheikh, oil-rich sheikh in the UAE, you can order up the weather for your wedding day.
Yeah.
Their full-page color advertisements, making it plain that this is, if you want to invest in changing the weather, we can help you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And China openly admitted in the Beijing Olympics that they altered the weather for the Olympics. Yeah, it's funny. I spent 10 years traveling across China for work. I was recruiting Chinese high school students for U.S. colleges, and I watched them put up the cameras in Beijing in 2009. They started putting them in before the Olympics, and then I watched London here in the UK do the same, and I'm thinking to myself, ooh, this isn't good. And when we think about the military uses of these projects, surveillance, track and control, the Pentagon in the United States has a fairly well-known military phrase called command and control. Geoengineering allows militaries to command and control the battlefield, to throw communication signals much further and more efficiently in an ionized atmosphere, radar, etc., right? To enhance computer capability for surveillance, right? In combination with our friends in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. So we're seeing kind of the merging of military, corporate, big tech, and of course, as your audience knows, big pharmaceutical projects, all in the name of, making us more healthy and saving the planet, etc. So yes, the blue roofs, the harps, these are all sort of visible signs, I would say, indications that strange things are afoot. And because in Maui, if you look at the houses that had the blue roofs that didn't get hit, there were some very big names there.
There were, yes.
Can we mention the names or not?
Oh, you can.
Yeah, so Oprah Winfrey.
Yes, I think it's probably the most well-known.
Yeah, it's the most well-known.
Yeah, and it's funny, I lived on the island of Maui for 2 years, and I learned to scuba dive in Lahaina, which was the town that was destroyed. And to think that it was a wildfire that somehow entirely destroyed that place when you know the landscape, right, of that particular west side of the island is ludicrous. And of course, there were all kinds of articles written explaining how it worked. It was very dry, and this happened, and that happened, and what have you. But purely looking at the landscape, there just weren't that many trees to create that incendiary inferno that we all saw on the television. Very strange.
And the real estaters went in there pretty quick to get the native people out.
Yes, they did. And there were,
And they blocked it all off so that nobody could film there.
Yeah.
The secrecy that was shrouded in that.
Yeah.
No one was allowed in to do podcasts, to interview. Yeah. Nothing.
Yeah. In the same way that after 9/11 in New York City in September of 2001, the remains of the buildings were very quickly carted away to China without much of an investigation. Yeah, there's this and that is what we call a tell, right? When you go to great lengths to hide evidence and prevent public conversation, something's afoot. So I live in Vermont, and Vermont now is the second most flooded county in all of the United States. We've had 3 historic floods, over the past few years, and we've been watching the skies quite closely in Vermont, and our Vermont communities are on the eastern spine at the base of the Green Mountains, and the weather comes right over the Green Mountains from the west, and when it rains, all of the rain gets funneled down into our narrow mountain valleys, and our towns and farms and what have you. So this is personal for us in Vermont because we're watching the geoengineering of the weather there.
Well, we're seeing it here, and there are people that don't realise that, farmers that cannot grow on land. I took you en route here today to
we had
my
so much
wonderful
fun.
little shop that I go to, the shed in the middle of nowhere, the Bosley Patch. And the wonderful lady that owns that, she has an organic farm. And for the last 3 years, she hasn't been able to grow anything. It has just been flooded.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the farmers, the humans who work on the land understand what's going on. Farmers, ranchers, loggers, fishermen. At OGA, I've written two published articles about a woman whose name should be a household name on everyone's lips. She is the Rachel Carson, author of Silent Spring, the Rachel Carson of the geoengineering free movement in the United States. She's no longer with us, but her name is Rosalind Peterson. She was a crop loss adjuster for the state of California in the 1990s. Literally spent all day, every day, driving across the state of California, meeting with farmers to figure out how to help them when disaster struck. That was her job as a crop loss adjuster. And she started noticing, looking at the skies, talking with farmers, measuring soil samples, water samples. She built a little team around her to do this. Beginning in the 1990s, she began calling out early the geoengineering that was beginning at that point in the 1990s. It's gotten much worse and more pronounced, I would say now. But yes, the farmers are the first to feel it, and thus do we all, because the farmer feeds us all, as the old song goes. So yeah, it's very important that we get together with our farmers. I could tell you many, many stories in the historical literature about farmers who figured out how geoengineering, even cloud seeding, was impacting their crops in a negative way, and have tried to organize to push back on it since the 1950s. It's quite interesting. And there's hope and there's promise here when we uncover that history.
You asked me earlier on our little jaunt around the
our
woods.
Foraging
you said to me, yes, we went on a little forage, didn't we? You asked me when I first knew about geoengineering.
Yeah.
And I'd forgotten, actually, when I answered that earlier. I followed it. I discovered it. There was an organic farmer in America, I think Azores Farms.
Okay.
I know his name was David because my brother was a grower, David, and he died from spraying an awful lot of chemicals on the land.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was having a run-in with Monsanto because Monsanto said that he had put some GMO seeds on his land, and he was going, I don't want your GMO seeds on my organic land. They have been, he reckoned, they have been sprayed onto his land, pushed by maybe the wind, cloud seeded. So he was going to take on Monsanto. And he was asking for people to write letters to the court about why an organic farmer would not want GMO seeds on their land. Yeah. Now, I'm on the other side of the world in a tiny little village, and I thought, I'm going to write my letter for the courts for him. So
You did it.
Yeah, bloody right I did.
Yeah.
And I sent it in, and then I wanted to watch the court case.
Yeah.
And I'm not very good with tech, and I'm still not very good with tech, Rob. But I was on my, I don't think I had a laptop then. You know, this is going back a few years. I had a computer. And he had put a link up somewhere too, because you could watch all the court cases in America. And so I was trying to work out how to get to this court and watch this case. And I ended up in another court with some residents in America, I don't know what state, where they had taken chemtrail deposits, predominantly aluminium, which they had scraped off their cars after these rains had happened. And this was in a court because they were going, we don't want to be sprayed anymore. There's aluminium on my car. Yeah. And I'm like, no, surely not. I mean, I was gobsmacked.
Yes.
And then I started doing a bit more research and a bit more. And then I remember in 2020, somebody sent me a load of photographs of people like Angela Merkel in these planes with the pilots who actually wear a badge saying chemtrails. Wow. It is a big rabbit hole to go down.
It is. And I remember now you and I were discussing this earlier, and I'm glad you brought it up. Once you see them in the sky, you cannot unsee them.
Yeah.
And there is some power there in beginning to recognize the reality of our situation. And as we recognize that reality, we join forces with our farmers and our ranchers and the people working the land and those political leaders who will listen and act. And they're out there.
Are there any political leaders that will listen?
They're hard to find. They're hard to find. But really, this is a really important moment for our species and for all of nature, all of living, breathing life itself. At the end of the day, chemtrails, to use your term, it's a term that's been weaponized, meaning it's used to discredit pesky askers of questions, so-called conspiracy theorists. Yeah, the term chemtrails has been weaponized, so it's not a term we use, but we should just mention this here. But beginning to recognize what's going on with these so-called chemtrails is the first step to organizing around true environmental resistance and true defense of nature and humans and all creatures, great and small, living and furred, feathered plants. And I think that's our call in this particular moment.
Now, I don't deny for one moment that we are trashing the planet. We see plastic seas on, in the Gulf of Mexico, and we see beaches where you can't see a single grain of sand. So I would have thought one of the most sensible things to do would be to ban plastic on all fruit and veg in the UK. I mean, the sheer amount, but they went for the plastic bag.
Yes.
Okay, which is, okay, so that's a lot of plastic saved, but they charge you for it, so you can still get them.
Right.
Just take them out the shops.
Right.
People will quickly remember to take their bags with them. I mean, I was with my youngest daughter once, and we'd forgotten our bag, and so we have this rule: if we can't carry it, then we can't have it. Oh. So, but she wanted some extra stuff because she was having some friends over, and she said, "Oh, I've got an idea." She took her coat off and she tied the arms together and did the zip up.
Brilliant.
And tied the arms around the neck. I went, "There we go, Mum." I'm going, "Brilliant. Okay, we can."
We've got a pouch.
We've got a pouch. So if they do these things quick enough, now I know you might go, "Well, you can't go and buy your Coca-Cola." And you shouldn't be buying it anyway because it's going to bloody kill you.
Yes.
Oh, am I going to get sued for that? Well, it's maybe we'll cut that bit out. It's very good for cleaning the toilet, one finds.
Yes, and one's car engine.
Yes.
When there's rust on it, with a toothbrush.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it is. I love your line of thinking here too, Philly. It really does call on us, maybe back to breathing, to simply be more present, to be more consciously mindful, to live simply so that others might live, as Gandhi and others have famously said, and to take our charge from the Old Testament, if I may, our charge to be true stewards of the garden, if you will, seriously. And we've got a big challenge.
We have, but people are waking up in their droves.
They are. And I was really encouraged, as I know you were this past weekend, in a room full of hundreds of people, having these kinds of conversations about what is really going on, what the historical record tells us, what the current moment has to share. And we are, as a species, the most successful species on the planet because, and I'm going to quote Yuval Noah Harari here, who was the spokesperson for the World Economic Forum, and not a man I often agree with, but he does say in his very first book, Sapiens, he says humans are the world's most successful species because we have learned how to collaborate flexibly in large groups around shared stories. And the shared story of the official story of climate change is not serving us. In fact, it's leading us down the wrong path, if you will. We are carbon-based life forms. Carbon dioxide is essential for all life, and to wage war on it is a fool's errand. Rather, let's lean into the more nuanced and complex story of the climate, our place here on the planet, our role as stewards, and really get our arms, our hearts, our minds, our breath around geoengineering and work from there. The good news is this has been ongoing. As people wake up to what's happening, we'll have more energy, goodwill, good
Absolutely.
ideas, time, talent, investment to work with. And that's how I get out of bed in the morning, is bearing witness to that.
Yes, we are joining forces, and it's been 5 years, just over 5 years now since the first lockdown, when the world was shut down for a little bit of a bug that came
Yes.
out of a lab somewhere. But people are, how people just went along with that, I will never know. I mean.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring this up, and I think this is apropos. The COVID-topian moment, as I like to call it, sowed a lot of seeds of distrust, and continues to, in the authorities, if you will, big tech, big pharmaceuticals, big government, big corporations, right? And to the extent that we can leverage that good energy coming out of that strange COVID-topian moment, which you and I are both well aware, and I know your listeners and viewers are as well, I think that will also serve us.
Yeah.
Because we're much less willing to trust official narratives now than maybe we ever have been, certainly in my lifetime.
I completely agree. Whether you like the man or not, you've got a resident at the White House, but there seems to be a very good team of people coming in behind him, including RFK Jr. Bobby has worked tirelessly. 4 states in America have banned geoengineering. So if it didn't exist, why is it banned in 4 states? Bobby Kennedy says he's going to ban it. Now, obviously, a lot of people are kind of going, he needs to work faster. And, he's kind of saying everybody should have the measles vaccine or, whatever. We have to look at the fact, really, that you have to work slowly to dismantle a system.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good ending place. This is a 100-year-old story, geoengineering. We're just getting our arms around kind of the reality of our situation. So it is going to take some time. And back to breathing, I think the first and biggest solution, people are like, what do we do? The first thing to do is to relax, bring your breath into your own awareness, be mindful,
okay, I'm going to
be present.
I'm going to put my cup of tea down. I want you to put your cup of tea down, and everybody out there, put your cup of tea down and just sit really comfortably. And I'm just going to ask Rob to guide us. I'm going to get my feet on the ground.
Yes.
Apart from my legs are so short, I can't get my feet on the ground and my back straight. But will you guide us through your beautiful breath that I learnt with you at the weekend?
So, yes, this is balanced breathing, or I like to joke LSD. We're going to take some LSD here, natural microdosing. Okay, so if we just shut our mouth, close our eyes, and just bring ourselves into the presence of our breath, moving in and out through our bodies. LSD, balanced breathing is simply breathing light and slow and deep. Step 1, we're already doing. When we shut our mouth, we breathe in and out through our nose. We breathe light instead of heavy. Take a nice breath in through the nose. A nice breath out. Stay with that flow. And as you flow, know that you are shifting the biochemistry of your breathing, optimizing your chemoreceptors, activating the 36 benefits of nasal breathing. So many. And now second, if we take our left hand, we place it over our heart. Peek at us if you're not sure where your heart is, and our right hand below. Breathing slow, we use what we call breath mind. Breathing light is breath flow. Breathing slow, breath mind. To slow down the breath, and as you breathe in through your nose, imagine, as you breathe in, your heart expanding, your nervous system alerting, and then as you breathe out through your nose, the heart contracts. The nervous system relaxes. Try that again, breathing in. Heart expands, nervous system alerts, breathing out. Heart contracts. Nervous system relaxes. And now, last stop on our tour, bringing our hands down to either sides of our belly button. What we call breath body or breathing biosomatics. As we breathe in, just feel your belly gently push out on your right hand. Left hand, try that. Breathing in, belly gently pushes out, and then exhale. Belly returns to midline. One more. Inhale. And exhale. And now if we bring our right hand up to our heart, left hand over the belly button, we'll end. Balanced breathing. Light, slow, and deep by breathing in. 3, 2, 1. Let's pause at the top. 2, 1. Breathing out. 3, 2, 1. We pause at the bottom. 2, 1. 2 more in. This is the box. And pause. 3, 2, 1. 2 more out. 3, 2, 1. And pause at the bottom. Notice how you feel. Last one in. 3, 2, 1. Last one, pause at the top. Last one out. Last one, pause at the bottom. Eyes closed, slowly let your breath return. This is balanced breathing, light, slow, and deep, what I call natural microdosing, LSD. This is how we want to be breathing 99% of our lives, at wake, asleep, at work, at play, just like this. And if we can do this together, as we respire, we inspire one another, we conspire together as we aspire upwards to this common vision for Team Human, for all of nature, for becoming more spiritual, whatever that means to you. Begin with the balanced breath. And let's take a nice last deep inhale through the nose. Maybe one last sip, inhale at the top. And let it out through the mouth. Relax the shoulders. Drop your hands. Shake everything out. Open your eyes. All right.
When everything goes AWOL, everything comes back to the breath. Dr. Rob Williams, a fascinating podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Philly, thank you for having me and for foraging this morning and for the tour. You live in a beautiful place.
Thank you. I'll see you next week, everybody. Go and do your breath work. And remember, the doctor of your future is you.